So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allan Nebrija. I work at Leeward Community College. I'm one of two disability specialists here. And what we do is we basically work with students with self-identified disabilities and provide classroom accommodations as needed, right? So today we're going to cover ADA and classroom accommodations. I'll talk generally about the ADA and also go into some specifics as far as what our processes are here at Leeward. Um, every um, every campus has a disability services office, and generally our processes are the same. There might be some differences in the nuances and in the type of softwares that we use, but for the most part, the steps that students need to take in self-identifying are generally the same on all of our campuses and even on our colleges on the continent in the mainland. So what we're going to cover today, we'll cover a little bit about the United States law and higher education, how it applies to students with disabilities. I'll go over the differences between high school and college in terms of what schools are obligated to provide, and also what students' responsibilities are in both arenas, high school and in the higher education areas. We'll also talk about major shifts in disability services. We just are coming out of a pandemic where a lot of our classroom instruction and modalities have changed, and it's also left a lot of residual effects for our students and also our faculty and staff in terms of statuses of their mental health, overall general health, and how that affects their ability to function, go to work, participate in their courses. So that definitely has affected some of the things we do in terms of what type of accommodations we provide, and I'll go over that as well. One of the things that has come out of the pandemic is we have a lot of students who are expressing that they're experiencing symptoms of long COVID. And if you're not familiar with long COVID, we'll touch briefly on what it is, what the symptoms are, and also how it's affected our students in terms of their access to learning, and what type of new accommodations has come out of that in terms of not so much what we're providing, but also what students are requesting. We'll go over what accommodations are for, and we'll go over what they're not for, and then also go over some scenarios, and hopefully have time to address the questions that you guys might have. So the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was actually signed into law in 1990. There was an amendment in 2008, and really the amendment was just to restore or to reaffirm the rights that students and individuals have with a disability under the ADA laws, right? So just to give you an idea what the ADA covers, the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in the areas of employment, state and local government, public accommodations, parks, anything that falls under government entities, commercial facilities. So that would be like going to the mall, going to watch a concert at the Blaisdell, and then of course, transportation and telecommunications. In order for individuals to receive protections under the ADA, they must have a disability, and disability is defined by the ADA as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So just being able to get up in the morning, put on your clothes, brush your teeth, those are really basic activities that maybe a lot of us take for granted. If any of that is impaired, then that would fall under category of having a disability. Also, if you are a person or individual who has a history or record of such an impairment, that would qualify you. And also a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. So those last two bullets, basically, if you had gone to a doctor and got evaluated or a medical professional, psychiatrist, therapist, and they've evaluated you and diagnosed you with a disability, that would qualify you. And if you are perceived by others as having such an impairment, so that comes into play for our students who are in the DOE K through 12 setting, because they don't have to self-identify, right? They exhibit certain behaviors in the classroom or when they're out, interacting with their peers. And these behaviors could be, missing class often, being disruptive, not doing well academically. So if these behaviors are identified by a teacher, a counselor, or even parents, then that would fall under this statement of, a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. And there's also the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which basically prohibits discrimination based on disability in any program or activity operated by recipients of federal funds. So that would be, again, the Department of Education, the University of Hawaii system of colleges, that includes our main campuses, our campuses at UH Hilo, West Oahu, and our community colleges. We all receive federal funding. So because of that, we are not, or we are prohibited from discriminating against students or individuals with a disability, right? So here we're going to talk about the differences between high school and post-secondary education. Big differences in high school, minors are considered, the environment they're in mandatory educational settings. So they really don't have a choice but to be in school, right? Unless they get legally signed out by guardians or parents. And because of that, the responsibilities of the school district, the state or the city, whatever the school district falls under, they're very different in terms of what colleges would provide, and also the laws that govern the type of accommodations, how they're provided, whether they should be provided or not, are also different. So students in the K through 12 setting, they fall under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA. If you've worked in the DOE or worked with the DOE, you probably hear this term a lot, right? IDEA. So it's the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And what that does is anybody who is identified or is recognized as having a disability in the K through 12 setting, they qualify for certain accommodations, modifications, not only to the physical access to the school, but also to be able to participate in their learning, be able to have access to the course materials and any other type of services that's going to help them succeed, right? And that's a key word in the K through 12 setting, and also comes into play when students come in to higher ed, is the services that they're provided at the high school level through the IDEA is really to ensure that they succeed, they matriculate from one grade to another, and eventually graduate. And that's very different from the services we provide at the college level. So in high school, or the K, again, I say high school a lot because a lot of the students we work with are transitioning from high school, but really in the K through 12 setting, it's the school district that needs to identify the student's disability, right? So that responsibility is on teachers, counselors, even parents, right? So the student doesn't need to self-advocate for themselves. They of course can if they have that capability, but it's really the school district who identifies the student. And that can involve anything, again, from, if you're a teacher, you see your student not coming to class every day, or they do come to class, but they're very disruptive, they're not ready to learn, or they're trying to learn, but they're not doing well academically. So usually what happens is a referral is made to either the counselor's office, and then eventually to the, every school has a special ed resource teacher that helps with the IEPs and coordinates the meetings between parents and all the other team members. So once that happens, the student is usually evaluated for the disability. Once that evaluation is complete, and that's when the players involved, the counselors, the school psychologists, therapists, or whatnot, come together and they form an IEP team for the student, and the student gets an IEP developed for them. The IEP, if you're not aware what it stands for, is an acronym for Individualized Educational Plan. And in that plan, it details out, student strengths and weaknesses, what their disability is, and what's going to be done in order for them to ensure that they can participate and succeed in the learning process. So things that occur at the high school level could be, getting extended time on assignments, extended time on tests and exams, tests and quizzes. I've heard students inform me that there are some days that they could miss class just because of their disability. They weren't able to make it to school on certain days, so they miss class without getting penalized. Sometimes they get lesser or reduced assignment requirements. So if you're a student with a disability in the K-12 setting, and the assignment is to write a 20-page paper, it's not out of the question, or it's not atypical for a student to have to write only 10 pages while everyone else has to write 20, right? Or just getting assignments reduced altogether, and still meet the same standards as the other students who don't have a disability. So that's very typical in the K-12 setting. Oftentimes you find students who have one-on-one assistants, maybe a one-on-one tutor. They'll be in an inclusion classroom where there'll be other regular ed students, but they have their own almost private teacher in that classroom. So that's very typical at the K-12 level. And again, what's very important to know is that at the K-12 level, if there's any signs or indications that student is going to fail a certain grade level or not going to graduate, then the IEP team's responsibility is to come together and to brainstorm and come up with methods, ideas, accommodations to ensure that the student succeeds and matriculates and graduates. That's a key thing to know, because that happens. That's a requirement by law, really, for students at the K-12 level, and that's a responsibility of individuals working in that setting. Once the student transitions, graduates from high school, and decides to come to college, everything in the IEP is no longer valid. The IEP is actually no longer active. We do get a lot of students who show up at our office to do an intake, and they do have their IEP with them. And every campus is different in terms of how they handle that information. But for us, we'll accept the IEP in terms of documentation. We're not going to replicate it, but a lot of times there's information in there that we can glean about the student that tells us about, not just their disability, but what their challenges are and what the school has done to mitigate some of those challenges and help them with their learning. So again, we don't always duplicate everything, but it kind of gives us a baseline to start off from. And that's always very helpful. Oftentimes students will bring the IEP and also an evaluation from a psychiatrist or a therapist that details out their their disability and recommendations of what kind of accommodations would be good for them at the college level. So once you transition from high school and you decide to come to college, it's now considered elective education versus mandatory education, right? So you're also now considered an adult pursuing educational opportunities after high school, and that's a choice that you're making on your own. And because of that, the laws that govern your rights are vastly different. I talked earlier about success being very important in the high school or K-12 setting. Once you become a college student, the ADA laws that are there to protect you, the Section 504 laws, are meant to provide equal access. And that doesn't always equate to success, right? Of course, we all want students to succeed in college, but in terms of our services and what we provide and the purpose of us providing those accommodations, our goal is to ensure that you can access your course content, your course material, and participate in the learning process at an even playing field, right? As your peers who don't have the disability. And if you want to succeed, it's going to really depend a lot on you as a student, how well you comprehend the course content, how well do you utilize the resources on your campus, such as tutoring, um, mentoring services, if those are available, and also your instructors, right? We always tell students, if they are not familiar with the content or they don't understand what the assignment is about, make sure they contact their instructor, set up a meeting with them, and then also try to get tutoring and help. Right. So again, adults in elective educational settings are provided access to equal opportunities by the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Section 504 Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So the big difference is, I mentioned earlier, in high school, students are identified by the school district, the individuals that work with them. Once you become a college student, it is your responsibility to self-identify. So our professors are not going to come up to you and say, I notice you've been missing class a lot, or I notice you're struggling with my class, you're not passing your exams, or you're scoring really low. You should go to the disability services office and get help. Right. So our professors, our counselors would not do that. In fact, they're advised not to, because you're taking away the students' right to self-identify. So in order for students to get services, they need to, of course, know where our office is, come to the office, self-identifying. That just means letting us know who they are and they have a disability that they would like to request classroom accommodations. And then from there, our process kicks in. We have them fill out some forms. For us, we do everything electronically. We have a portal that students log into, and they input their information. Once it's done, they submit those forms electronically, and then their name shows up in our appointment queue. And then either myself or my colleague will reach out to schedule an appointment with the student. And the appointment usually takes anywhere from an hour, maybe 2 hours, just depends on the kind of information that student is sharing and the kind of information that we need. Once we're done with the intake appointment, we have all the information from the documentation that they provided, and we can make a connection between the disability and the barrier to access. Then that's where we make our determination if the student qualifies for extended time, a note taker, quiet location to take a test, or preferential seating. We make those determinations hopefully at the completion of our intake with the student. And then when that's done, the students are able to send out their accommodation letters to their professors electronically through email, and then our professors go in and view the letter and acknowledge the accommodations, and then from that day on, the accommodations are active for the student, right? If there are students who require like one-on-one aid to help them regulate behavior or just navigate the college experience, the ADA does not require college institutions to provide that one-on-one aid. The student actually has to come already with that aid, and that aid can be provided through other agencies such as DD, the DOH, developmentally delayed division, or sometimes DVR, Department of Vocational Rehab, will provide an aid to the student if the student qualifies. And there's also other private organizations that if the student qualifies for, they could have an aide come on the campus with them. The college does not employ the one-on-one classroom aide. However, for our office, if a student lets us know that they have an aide that's going to accompany them to class, what we would normally do is request an appointment with the student and the aide, and just lay down some ground rules, talk about student conduct code, and also really reaffirm with the aide what their responsibilities are, just so that there's no misunderstanding in the classroom of what their purpose is, right? They're not there to do the work for the student. They're not there to be the student's tutor or one-on-one teacher even, right? They're there really just to help student regulate behavior, navigate the classroom area or the whole experience, educational experience. Right? So we talked about the types of disabilities we dealt with or deal with, and these are all disability types pre-COVID, right? So most of the students who self-identify with our office are identifying with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. We have a lot of students who identify as ADHD, you know, not having the ability to focus or to get easily distracted. Sometimes we have students who have a combination of these. We also have students who are visually impaired or hearing impaired. So for those students, we have different types of services that we would provide for them. So as you can see, on the slide, I'm not going to read everyone, but we also have students with mental health conditions and students who also present with physical disabilities as well. So this is pretty much what we've been dealing with prior to the pandemic. I've been here for in the disabilities office for since 2015. So what is that now? 7 years. Yeah. So this is kind of behaviors that are presented in our office. So we move on, we go through the pandemic. And then some of the accommodations, some of the disabilities change, and we'll go over that later. So as far as approved accommodations, again, pre-COVID, I mentioned some of this earlier. So we provide like note-taking assistance for students who request that and qualify for that. So we use an audio note taker. So students are able to access software through their laptop. Then we provide them a license to access that software. And in the classroom, they can open up the laptop and open up the software, click on record, and it'll record the lecture for them. If they're taking a Zoom class and there's a live lecture in the Zoom session, they can also use that same software to record the audio from the Zoom session. And when the recording is done, class is done, they can save it, give it a file name, and then listen to the lecture over and over just to, they can stop and pause if they want to take notes, or they can just re-listen to the lecture to gain the content. The software we use also has a transcription feature now. So after they record the audio, they can actually transcribe it into a page of notes for themselves. So that's been very helpful. A lot of students really appreciate that. Other accommodations we provide is extended time for testing, separate testing location has minimal distraction. So our office has 3 testing rooms that can fit about 2 students each. So most students will opt to take their test in there versus in the classroom. We have accessible furniture if needed. We provide scribe and readers for students who might need it as well. We have screen readers for students, and we also, if needed, will provide a scribe if someone is visually impaired and need someone to fill out the test forms for them. Yeah, not give them the answers, but just read the questions out, and then they tell us what the answers are, and we mark it for them. So there have been major shifts in disability services as far as what types of disability students are reporting. So here, if you look between May 2021 and May 2022, these are the common mental health issues among American college students that are being reported. So anxiety is always at the top of the list, depression, eating disorders. We have people reporting bipolar disorder and ASD, substance abuse, and schizophrenia. So what changed, or what occurred after the pandemic? So one thing we learned was the use of technology. It wasn't always equal access to a lot of our students. During the pandemic, about 4,000 post-secondary institutions in the United States shifted to remote learning successfully for the most part, with little advance notice, right? We all had to pivot really quickly. It accelerated online learning. So a lot of our instructors who were used to teaching face-to-face had to learn how to teach online very quickly. And a lot of our students as well, who are used to taking face-to-face courses, had to learn how to navigate, La Lima and just the online learning management systems that a lot of the universities and colleges provide for their online classes. So what's new, accommodating disabilities in a synchronous online environment, that was new for us. So what we did on our campus is we reached out to all of our students to figure out, what type of accommodations they need based on the change in their learning environment, right? And we were able to accommodate that. Talked about the digital divide. So it really exposed the haves and have-nots of those who had access to technology. So some of our students had very minimal access to Wi-Fi. So the online learning environment was actually very challenging for them. If they had access to Wi-Fi, it wasn't sometimes not reliable. So it would cut off and they would miss out on the content. So we had students coming to campus just to access our Wi-Fi services during class time. And that seemed to have helped. But overall, it really did expose the haves and have-nots in terms of reliable internet connections and even technology. Students having access to laptops and iPads and things like that. So some of the new tools that came out of the pandemic was, again, online, synchronous, asynchronous learning. We all use Zoom now, which we hardly used prior to the pandemic, right? As far as accessibility, we had to ensure that websites and course materials were all accessible to students since we were doing more online instruction. Communication, when students are no longer face-to-face, are no longer in face-to-face environments, we had to take extra steps to make sure that they're being informed. So there are a lot more emails going back and forth, a lot of more Zoom appointments, and again, the Wi-Fi access, right? Having reliable connection. Disability types post-COVID, most of it remained the same, right? If you look at this chart, and if you can recall the other chart I provided pre-COVID, a lot of the disabilities are the same. The one new addition that we have on here as an emerging disability is long COVID, right? So we have a lot of students who are now reporting that they're suffering or experiencing long COVID, and it's affecting their ability to attend class, to stay alert in class sometimes, and just to be consistent in turning in their assignments and participating in the learning process. All right, so what is long COVID? So according to the CDC, people with long COVID just have a range of new or ongoing symptoms that can last for weeks. So if you look at the symptoms here, tiredness, fatigue, chest pain, cough, fever, it's very similar to what people were reporting when they had COVID. So what's basically happening with long COVID is a lot of these symptoms are just not going away, or they keep recurring. So students are out of school longer, missing more classes, not able to participate when they're supposed to, even if it's online and they have to log in. Sometimes their health just impairs them from doing that. So just some guidance on long COVID. Really what we're trying to ask here is for instructors just to be a little bit more understanding. Just realize that some students, are still experiencing some of these symptoms and they're not going away. And because of that, they may require certain accommodations that we're not used to providing, right? Here on this slide, it talks about what is long COVID and what are the symptoms. So we kind of went over that in the previous slide. Can long COVID be a disability under ADA? Again, anything can be a disability as long as it limits one or more major life activity. So, it's really a case-by-case basis whether we determine if long COVID would student with long COVID would qualify for any type of accommodations. Right? And they'd have the same rights as other disabilities under the ADA and 504. It doesn't really change. Again, what does this mean for higher education? We're just having faculty being more informed, more thoughtful, and more engaged in the ADA implementation process. And that's partly why we're doing a lot of these trainings, because a lot of our faculty and staff, and we're hiring new people all the time. There's always new instructors, lecturers. So it's good for them to have this information, especially with what we're dealing now after the pandemic. So there are some disabilities that we would consider episodic in nature. That could mean seizures, things like students who've experienced like traumatic brain injury, where there are certain days where they just cannot function, cannot get out of bed, and this affects their attendance, obviously, and also their ability to submit their assignments on time. And some of the things that our students are reporting with long COVID could fall under this category, right? So OCRs provided some guidelines to determine, what's an essential part of class, right? Is attendance essential in terms of, is there classroom interaction between the instructor and the student that's going to be key for them to pass the class? Because sometimes there's not. Like for asynchronous courses, students just need to log on and read the chapters, do the work, and maybe participate in some offline discussion. Do student contributions in class constitute a significant component of the learning process? So all of that needs to be determined when we're considering certain type of accommodations, such as extended time for assignments, or also a flexible attendance where students can miss classes a certain amount of days during the semester and not get penalized, right? So that's why they have there, to what degree does a student's failure to attend constitute a significant loss to the educational experience of other students in the class, as well as their own. The syllabus comes into play when we are considering attendance policies or attendance accommodations. So all of this is considered, and we also meet with our instructor and the student to figure out, how many days are going to be realistic for them to miss without it affecting, their ability to do well in the course and of course pass the course. So just some more important notes on flexible attendance. At least for us, with flexible attendance agreements, they must be executed with cooperation of the student, the course instructor, and our DSO office. We have a form that we have everyone sign off on to detail the parameters of the agreement. The accommodation is not retroactive, and that's true for all accommodations. So if a student decides they're not going to engage with our office until mid-semester, because that's when they realize they're struggling and they're not passing the class, they have the right to do that, but the accommodations will only be active from that point on. So if the student missed some exam or didn't do well on an exam, they can't request a retake, because now they can't say like, well, now I have disability services or I have accommodations. Can I retake the last 2 exams that I missed because I didn't have accommodation at that time? So the answer to that would be no, right? Because the accommodations are not retroactive. Accommodation of flexible attendance may not be reasonable if regular attendance and class participation is an essential element of the course. Again, if attendance is highly dependent or required in order for a student to pass the class, then this is something that we would discuss with the student, that this is not a reasonable request at this time, right? It's also not a blanket permission to miss class, so they can't like just not go to class whenever they don't feel like it because they have this accommodation. Also, students may not expect to turn in all late missed work at the end of the instruction period. When we first started giving out some of these accommodations of flexible attendance on assignment deadlines as well, we did have some concerns from our instructors. Am I going to get everything at the end of the semester? So that's something that we, again, for our office, make sure that we have a clause in there that you only have 1 to 2 days after the deadline to submit your assignment, nothing further than that. So just some do's and don'ts. For students, we always tell them to ask for help early and ask for help often. For our instructors, please keep information confidential and use discretion when discussing accommodations with your students. Again, students have the right to self-identify, so please don't assume that a student either has or does not have a disability. Continue learning and being proactive in your design and implementation of course information, materials, and delivery. So I don't know if everyone knows, but a few years ago, the University of Hawaii system as a whole entered into a corrective action agreement with the Office of Civil Rights, because we were basically sued for not having accessible websites, accessible content. So that's partly why we've been doing a lot of training on our campuses on how to create accessible documents for our instructors, how to ensure that everything they put up online, whether it's videos or pictures, that is accessible to students who may have like a hearing impairment or sight impairment, right? So our EMC works closely with course design with our professors to make sure that everything is compliant. And then we also have our website people who make sure everything that's put up on our college website is accessible as well. And that also includes translation to different languages and dialects. Important to note, the primary responsibility of at least the Leeward Disability Services Office is to ensure equal access to educational offerings by providing appropriate accommodations for students with disabilities. The lead DSO does not provide therapeutic services for students reporting mental health concerns. We have a mental health professional on our campus that we can refer students to. Again, if a student discloses they have a disability and would like for you to provide accommodations and you're an instructor, we ask that you direct them to our Getting Started with Leeward DSO website, and they can fill out the information from there, and then they'll get a call from our office to do an intake appointment. Yeah. So again, what are accommodations for? Accommodations are to ensure that students with disabilities are able to access their course at an even playing field as students without the disabilities. And again, accommodations are meant to remove barriers to learning. They're not there to ensure any type of success. And it doesn't mean we don't want our students to succeed. It's just that our accommodations are just strictly meant to make sure that the barriers to learning are removed. So we do have students sometimes tell us that, you gave me extended time on an exam and I only got a B, but I'm actually an A student. So it looked, I think if you give me more extended time, like instead of time and a half, maybe if you give me double, then I can work up to that A. So that's not the purpose of the accommodation, right? The accommodation is to ensure that you can participate in the testing process at an even playing field. The grade that you get, is not really determined on whether we give you time and a half, double time, or triple time on your exam, right? That's going to be based on how hard you study, how well you comprehend the material that's being taught to you in the classroom. And that's kind of, again, brings us to what aren't accommodations for. So again, they're not meant for students to achieve the highest grade possible. They're not meant to reduce any stress that comes with the learning process. So that's one thing we try to emphasize with our students when we're meeting with them, that learning is hard. Coming to college, making that commitment, it's not an easy thing to do. So you are going to have struggles, you're going to have stresses, and a lot of that comes with not just the learning process itself, but also managing your time. If you're a student that also has a part-time job, you could be a single parent or a parent, juggling responsibilities that way. So all of that comes into play when we're talking about, the challenges you experience with the learning process. Accommodations are not retroactive. And I put this in there because we had a situation. Accommodations are not meant to help you qualify for any type of benefits like medical insurance, financial aid, or Section 8 housing, right? We had a student who wanted us to reduce their course load so that they could stay in housing or qualify for the Section 8 rate. And that's not something that our office would be responsible for doing. Let's see. Yeah, so the rest are just scenarios on what to do, right? If students show up in your class and you're a college professor, they say they have a disability and they want extra time, what do you do? Again, for us, we inform our instructors to direct them to our office or to our website. Students has an IEP from high school. Can they receive the same accommodations as they did in high school? And the answer is no. Because it's success versus access. So we don't just duplicate the IEP. There may be some similarities, some things that fall under the same scope, and like extended time for testing, they may have received that in high school. That's very appropriate at the college level. But reducing assignment requirements, at, again, very appropriate in high school, but would not be appropriate at the college level, right? I had a one-on-one teacher or personal assistant in high school. Can I have one in college? Again, the answer to that would be no. You would have to provide that service on your own before you come to class. I need transportation to get to and from school, and I have a disability. Does the school pay for my transportation or provide transportation services? Again, the answer to that would be no. The ADA does not require us to provide transportation services. The student has to make those arrangements on their own. So that's pretty much it. We have different versions of these presentations. It just depends who I'm presenting to, and we try to revise it depending on the audience, but we always try to include the same general information. Some of our presentations are really centric to students, so you'll see things there that you won't see in a faculty presentation. But just want to thank everyone for attending. This last slide just has our contact information. And I will share these slides. So anyone who wants a copy of the slide deck, you can email me and I'll share it with you. I'll share it with Scott and Tasha as well. So if anyone wants it, it's open to anyone. So you'll have our information there.